The screen was blank, and Maya was too. For 15 years, her identity had been a reflection in that glowing rectangle. A writer, a creator, a professional. Now, the project was gone, the contract terminated. The hum of her computer was the only sound, a quiet accusation in the sudden silence of her home office. This is where 95% of us find ourselves at some point. Not just facing a failure, but facing the emptiness where our self-worth used to live. This story isn't about the fall, it's about the quiet, deliberate work of rebuilding from the ground up. Resilience is often misunderstood as toughness, an armored shell that deflects hardship. But true resilience is more like a deep-rooted tree. It has the capacity to bend in the storm, to sway with forces that would snap something rigid. The real work begins in the quiet moment after the wind has passed, when everything feels heavy and still. For Maya, the loss was specific, a creative career she had meticulously built for 15 years. The internal storm that followed wasn't just about lost income, it was a whirlwind of self-doubt and shame. The central question of her story, and perhaps for anyone listening who has faced a similar fracture, is this. What do you do when the very thing that defined you is gone? How do you find your footing when the ground has disappeared? In the days that followed, Maya's world became a map of small, crushing details. The morning coffee tasted bitter without the anticipation of work. The silence in her apartment, once a cherished space for focus, now felt vast and empty. She tried to return to her craft, opening a new document, but the cursor blinked back at her with a mocking indifference. Each forced sentence felt hollow, a painful echo of what she once could do. These failed attempts only deepened the wound, proving the voice in her head that whispered, "You've lost it." Well-meaning friends offered advice that landed like stones. "Just start a passion project," they'd say, or "everything happens for a reason." Their words, intended to lift her, only highlighted the chasm between their understanding and her reality. They saw a career setback. She felt a personal obliteration. The turning point didn't arrive with a bang, but with a slow, sinking realization. The struggle itself, the frantic effort to immediately fix what was broken, was exhausting her. She was fighting the reality of her loss instead of accepting it. One Tuesday, she simply stopped fighting. Instead of forcing herself to the desk, she put on her shoes and walked out the door with no destination. The air outside was cool. She noticed the weight of her feet on the pavement, the sound of distant traffic, the way the light filtered through the leaves. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't trying to be productive. She was just walking. And in that simple act of stopping the struggle, a tiny space opened up. It wasn't a solution, but it was a respite. It was the first small acknowledgement that the path forward might not be about rebuilding the old structure, but about discovering an entirely new landscape. Maya made that walk a daily practice. It became the first of her unlikely tools. The reconstruction did not begin with grand plans or bold declarations. It began with the quiet, almost imperceptible work of noticing. She started to notice the rhythm of her breath when anxiety tightened her chest. She noticed the way a cup of tea could warm her hands and, for a moment, anchor her in the present. This was the practice of noticing without judgment. She didn't try to stop the storm of thoughts about her failure. She simply gave her breath a job. In for 4 counts, hold for 2, out for 6. The air itself became a small boat, carrying the hot panic away, little by little. The most radical tool she discovered was acceptance. Not a resigned defeat, but a clear-eyed acknowledgement. "This is where I am right now," she would say to herself, standing in her silent kitchen. "I am a person without the career that defined me, and I am still breathing." This acceptance was not the end of the journey. It was the solid ground on which she could finally stand. She found a strange steadiness in simple physical tasks. Washing dishes, folding laundry, repotting a plant. These actions had a clear beginning and end. They were small victories that built a new foundation of competence, one she could feel in her hands. Weeks turned into a month. One afternoon, she found herself at her desk, not out of obligation, but from a faint flicker of curiosity. The blank screen was still there, but the pressure was gone. She picked up a pen, a simple ballpoint, and a notebook she'd used for grocery lists. She wrote a single sentence about the quality of the afternoon light, then another about the sound of a bird outside her window. There was no goal, no audience, no metric for success. It was just a mark on a page. And in that simple act, she discovered the core of resilience. It isn't built in the dramatic comeback. It is built in these quiet moments of reconnection. When you touch a forgotten part of yourself without any demand that it perform. Her entire definition of success began to soften and shift. It was no longer about external validation or finished products. Success became the feeling of a steady breath. It was the ability to sit with discomfort without being consumed by it. It was the small victory of cooking a proper meal for herself. This new foundation was built from materials she had overlooked in her previous life. Patience, self-compassion, and the courage to be still. The reconstruction was not about recreating the old house, but about learning to live comfortably in the open air, trusting that shelter would reveal itself in time. Nearly a year after her world had contracted, an email arrived. It was from her old client. The project she had been working on had been revived with a new budget. They wanted her back, with a significant fee increase. The subject line alone sent a jolt through her system, a familiar cocktail of excitement and dread. The old identity, the one that felt so shattered, shimmered back into view like a mirage. She could have that life back. The recognition, the creative challenges, the financial security. She read the offer 3 times, feeling the pull of the familiar path. This was the moment of true strength. The conflict was not with an external force, but an internal one. The part of her that still craved that old validation warred with the quiet, steady presence she had cultivated over months of small steps. She sat with the decision for a long time. She didn't rush. She noticed the tightness in her shoulders, the quickening of her pulse, the old patterns of stress. But beneath that, she also felt something new, a deep, solid knowing. Returning to that project would mean abandoning the hard-won peace she had built. It would mean stuffing the person she had become back into the box of the person she used to be. The strength was in the clarity. She saw that the offer, while flattering, was a step backward. It was a return to a structure that had ultimately proven fragile because her entire sense of self was tied to its stability. The resilience she had forged was not about being immune to failure. It was about knowing what to carry forward and what to leave behind. She had carried forward her love for observing the world. She was leaving behind the need for that love to be validated by a paycheck or a title. With a calm that surprised her, she drafted a reply. She thanked them for the offer and declined, wishing them the best with the project. She did not offer a long explanation. The decision was for her, not for them. Hitting send felt nothing like a failure. It felt like a final, gentle closing of a heavy door. The clarity that washed over her was the product of having rebuilt from the ground up. She knew the strength of her foundation because she had laid every stone herself. She realized, with a profound sense of peace, that she had never been broken. She had been reshaped. The shattering was not an end, but the necessary, painful process of making space for a stronger, more integrated version of herself to emerge. Maya's life 1 year later did not look like she had planned. It was quieter, simpler. She wrote small pieces for a local newsletter, finding joy in capturing the character of her neighborhood. She had a garden now, her hands often dirty from the soil. The confidence she carried was not loud or boastful. It was a quiet knowing that resided deep in her bones. It was the confidence of having survived the fall and discovered that the ground was not as far away as she had feared. Her capacity for joy had expanded because it was no longer contingent on a single source of success. It was found in the steam rising from a mug, the success of a seedling, the flow of words on a quiet morning. Resilience, she understood, was not a final destination she had reached. It was an ongoing practice, a commitment to meeting each day with a steady breath and the courage to take the next small step. The core lesson of Maya's journey is that resilience is the quiet, daily work of rebuilding. It is the accumulation of small, steady steps taken when no one is watching. I encourage you to notice those steps in your own journey. What is the one small, steady thing you can do today? The path forward is built one breath, one choice at a time. I'd love to hear what resilience looks like for you right now. Share your small step in the comments.